Hello and thanks for joining us. So welcome to the program, everyone. I am Precious Amayu. Let's continue our coverage of the U.S. military intervention in Venezuela. Now, Delcy Rodriguez has been sworn in as Venezuela's interim president in a parliamentary session. This development followed the ousted Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro and his wife pleading not guilty to drug and weapons charges in a court in New York, where they had their first appearance. Nicolas Maduro boldly declared, quote, "I am still president of my country. I was captured," end quote. Mr. Maduro and his wife are not seeking bail or release. Their next hearing in court is scheduled for the 17th of March. Venezuela's exiled opposition leader, Maria Machado, plans to return home. But President Trump and other U.S. officials have dismissed calls to install her as president over claims that she lacks legitimacy. But she insists the new president cannot be trusted. And this is as latest reports say security forces are patrolling Venezuelan streets. Following the devastating attacks on Venezuelan military bases and the capture of the country's leader by U.S. Special Forces, the president of Colombia has vowed to take up arms if the U.S. attacks its territory. The Colombian president, Gustavo Petro, has ordered the tightening of security across his country's border with Venezuela. President Trump had threatened to take military action against Colombia if it does not put its acts together to stop illicit drug trafficking. In Cuba, many citizens are reportedly wondering if their country will not come under the spotlight for a possible attack by U.S. forces. Cuba's communist-run government has for decades relied on massive aid packages from oil-rich Venezuela for survival. During a protest 3 days ago in front of the U.S. Embassy in the Cuban capital, Havana, President Miguel Diaz-Canel promised not to let the Cuba-Venezuela alliance go down without a fight. The Venezuelan leader, Nicolas Maduro, is being accused of narco-terrorism conspiracy, cocaine importation conspiracy, possession of machine guns and destructive devices, among other criminal allegations. Now, to discuss the installation of Venezuela's vice president as interim leader, the capture and trial of Nicolas Maduro and his wife, which is currently generating international reactions, and again, just what this means for geopolitics. Global affairs analyst Collins Oweke joins me now from Brussels, Belgium. Good to have you join us, Mr. Oweke.
Thank you, Precious. Thank you for having me.
Right, so before we get into the latest development on this matter, I just wanted to first of all get your reaction to the weekend operation that captured Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro.
Dramatic. Well, it's not unprecedented because one way or the other, the U.S. has done this sort of thing in the past, but there is a uniqueness to this particular operation. The uniqueness essentially is the fact that, at a time when the world is embracing diplomacy more and more as a means, for settling, cross-border international issues, at a time when multilateralism is, supposed to be gaining more and more momentum, it is actually, shocking, unbelievable that America would, actually go this sort of thing in a unilateral manner. Now, what, we can expect, out of all this is that, with this action, the United States of America has actually weakened the country more in terms of, the dynamics in geopolitics. I mean, if we consider the,
Sorry, Mr. Oweke, I just want to comment. When you say weaken the country more, would that be Venezuela or would that be the U.S.?
Sorry, can I get that again?
You said the United States has weakened the country more. I just want to be sure of the country you're talking about. Is it Venezuela or the U.S.?
The U.S. itself.
All right.
I mean, in terms of the, the scramble to, gain leadership of the world. It's not hidden how China has been making advances and actually, gravitating towards a multipolar world. Now, what this means is that China has actually used this, as an opportunity to strengthen its position, particularly in the, in Latin America, and Brazil has a very, very important role to play there. I mean, you do know this, Precious, that BRICS has been gaining momentum as well, and so this doesn't help America. It actually hurts America in the long run.
Mm. And we will get to the geopolitics of this in just a moment. But I wanted to sort of talk about Maduro himself, who appeared in a court in New York today. Because of the way he was captured, the expectation was that he would probably enter a plea bargain and get this over and done with, quickly. But he's pleading not guilty, and along with his wife. What does this signal?
Well, what this signals is, his plea is more strategic. Domestically, it reinforces a narrative of resistance against foreign interference, and then look at it broadly, internationally, it challenges the legitimacy of U.S. Extraterritorial prosecutions. This is less about, legal innocence or guilt, and it is, in my view, more about sovereignty versus, enforcement power in global politics. This is essentially, what this signals.
And just for Venezuela, because the vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, has now been sworn in as the president. Initially, she was talking tough, but eventually took a softer tone. But while that was happening, President Trump in an interview said a group of U.S. officials that would include the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth. I think there is also the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, and then Vice President J.D. Vance. All of this will be headed by him, President Trump, who will help oversee America's involvement in Venezuela, almost as though President Rodriguez is just a figurehead. I mean, that will mark somewhat of a return to past imperialism, do you think?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And make no mistake about this, Precious. Notwithstanding the swearing in and all of that, I believe that, from the onset, the U.S. president has, he's not made any secret of his intentions. His words, we will run Venezuela. And so, no matter who is installed as president, the promise of running Venezuela is actually what is going to happen. Now, look at the high-powered delegation that he has, put together. Well, these are the men and women, essentially men, who will be running Venezuela. And, the person just sworn in, she will basically be a puppet. Let's not forget as well, and that was something you cleverly highlighted. She initially was talking tough. So what changed? What changed between the period she was talking tough and when the decision was taken for her to be installed? She is already dancing towards the music being played from Washington.
And I know that we talk about this, we discuss this in the context of the sovereignty of a nation, which is very important. But I mean, it's quite alarming. It is an important transformation, not just for the US, but also for global policy and ideologies, just seeing the political and economical roots of the new militarism that President Trump has now taken on. I just wanted to also speak on that because, again, we've also always talked about his transactional nature in terms of diplomacy. Just speak to that militarism and its roots in politics and economics.
Yeah, it's a very unique development, particularly if you consider it in the backdrop of what the President Trump campaigned with. He actually put in the focus America first, and with that he talked about the fact that he is going to focus on domestic American politics. Now, invading another country is not domestic American politics. Now, like some have averred, he appears to be failing at home, And so the only way to give himself, some relevance is to go abroad and try to, flex, some muscles. And so we're empowering militarism as opposed to, the growing need for diplomacy. And so, yes, indeed, this is a significant development in world politics. And so that brings the question forward. What will the rest of the world do? Take the EU, for instance. I mean, the EU doctrine is very clear about the fact that diplomacy takes the upper hand. Is that what is happening now? And how is the EU reacting? I mean, there's no point in second-guessing, China and the rest of America's adversary. They have taken a position. So, you see, the world is not getting better with all of this. I think the militarism is, a setback to how far the world has come.
And even more alarming is that President Trump has said this kind of military intervention could extend to other countries which he's at odds with. He has mentioned Colombia, he mentioned Mexico, Cuba, and Iran, as well as Greenland. Hasn't America learned from his lessons from Libya and Iraq, and then the consequences that it has on both the global and local context?
Obviously, it hasn't, And look, at Colombia's concern is pretty justified, but caution is essential. The danger lies not in a planned invasion, but in misinterpretation of intentions. Those intentions are troop, movements, intelligence operations, or border incidents escalating unintentionally. I want to believe that Colombia's priority is deterrence and preparedness, not provocation. And that also, goes round to, other countries in the region and others, beyond the South American region, Iran, and so on and so forth, that he has already named.
And it's interesting you mentioned Colombia, because President Gustavo Petro says he will take up arms for his country if necessary. He said that in the social media post, and then he also said that any violent U.S. intervention in Colombia would provoke a response. But beyond just that posturing, how worried should Colombia be? And then does the country have the capacity for response?
Well, I think what we have to actually think about is the feasibility of such attack. It's highly unlikely in the conventional sense. My reading is that the United States, currently favors sanctions, legal pressure, and diplomatic isolation, but the militarism is also something that one cannot take lightly. If we look at Donald Trump's, trajectory in the last period, history teaches us that pressure without dialogue can corner, actors into very, very dangerous responses. And so, if you mix that up with Donald Trump's unpredictability, then, you can, fairly conclude that the world appears to be sitting on a keg of gunpowder.
Especially because such interventions, like you mentioned, happen unannounced. We will take a break now, Mr. Weke, and then we'll come back to you. We'll just put you on hold. Let our viewers take in much of what we have said. What Now will be back in just a moment. Stay with us, everyone.
Doubt and fear doesn't occur at the canvas, it shows in the canvas. It shows the conation of raw earthen material slabbed, stroked, and molded at a pace provided by the doubt and fear. Every move weigh in the struggle of one to the other, merging the past to the present, brushstrokes of colors seen but not known. For when the wailing stops, the pieces settle down in abject beauty, erected for a century of a century. Speaking, advocating, protesting as the arts are meant to be.
All right, thanks for staying with us, everyone. We've been speaking about the recent capture of Venezuela's president from Venezuela by U.S. Military intervention. We've been speaking with Collins Oweke, who is a public affairs analyst, global affairs analyst rather, joining us from Brussels, Belgium. Thanks for staying with us, Mr. Oweke.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Precious.
So let's talk about the geopolitics of this. There's been only about a dozen countries responding to this in terms of criticism, using criticism as a response. We've seen response from China, Russia, Cuba, Colombia, and then ECOWAS has also responded. South Africa has responded, criticizing the US. But I read your editorial where you, in terms of the EU and how it should respond to this, you did mention that the EU already is a laid down tenets in terms of response, or protocols in terms of response. But I sort of wonder, because you used the word, the response from Europe is not diplomatic fence sitting. From where I sit, it doesn't even look like there is any response at all, let alone diplomatic fence sitting.
Well, that's a valid observation. You see, the EU has the obligation to not only be measured, but also diplomatic. Now, the initial statements point to these two elements, okay? Being measured, but also being diplomatic. However, the EU cannot afford to depart from its own established doctrine. And that doctrine is very, very clear. Diplomacy takes the upper hand. Rule-based international order is the norm. Respect for sovereignty, wherever it is non-negotiable. And no matter how much you hate any leader anywhere in the world, you have to rely on both local laws and international laws and conventions to, do what needs to be done. Those are the core principles of the EU doctrine. Now, are we going to see the EU actually abandon such a doctrine because, Donald Trump is the one, concerned here, and America has been their long-standing ally? No, I don't think so. But of course, the initial reaction, of course, can be expected because that is a part of that diplomacy that they continue to preach. But I do believe that the EU would introduce, some sort of counterweight. America should listen to the EU. I mean, I have no, glass ball that, would tell me that, yes, Donald Trump is going to listen to them, but he has a lot to win by listening to them. And I do believe, I'm confident that, in the coming days, in the coming weeks, that EU weight would have to be brought to bear on the situation going forward.
And I also understand that for a lot of countries that has an area of cooperation or areas of cooperation with the US, they wouldn't want to stir up troubled waters just to keep that cooperation. But at a time where the rule-based world order is being completely shattered by militarism, isn't that the right time for countries, especially those in Europe, to speak up?
Oh, well, yes. Ordinarily, yes, it is. But at the same time, there is a need, to exercise caution, to exercise restraint, so that you do not inflame the situation. And, there is absolutely no doubt about who they are dealing with. A man that is very, very unpredictable, doesn't play by any rule other than the one that he has established. Internationally established norms, those are not for him. Now, they have a challenge managing somebody of that nature. I mean, you do not say everything that you need to say all at the same time. And that is where that measured diplomacy comes in. But ultimately, people are going to take sides like, China has already been very, very vocal about where they stand. A few other countries have vested interest in the United States and would rather, take that aloof position based on their national interest. So there's a whole lot going on, and more will unfold in the coming weeks.
I'm wondering what this means for China and Russia. They have both criticized the U.S. They also are countries that have a long-standing alliance with Venezuela. They have criticized the U.S. but have not taken any action. What is the implication of this for both countries?
Well, the implication is that, people would have to do a very strong needs analysis in terms of, measuring for them, for their country's national interest, what the consequences of actually, speaking up would be, weighed against, the benefit of remaining, non-aligned. And so it is on the basis of that countries will take, determine what they are going to do. For country A, it's going to be different. For country B, it's going to be different. And the typical example is China, who obviously sees this as an opportunity, to make more gains in its ambition to be the dominant power against the United States. And so other countries will act differently. Others will support China. Turkey, for instance, and so on and so forth. So the polarization simply continues unabated.
At top of my head, I'm thinking of Libya. As I was speaking, I was thinking of Libya and the invasion of the U.S. and during the Arab Spring, and just the consequences that has had for the Sahel here on the continent, especially in terms of security, has been enormous. The UN Security Council is due to debate the legality and implication of the U.S. invasion of Venezuela. We both know that President Trump clearly has no regards for international law. Are we likely to see more resistance and solidarity on a global scale? And then, really my real question would be, will international condemnation even produce any lasting consequence at all?
Yes, it risks doing so, though perhaps not irreversibly. Take the European Union and Brazil, they generally favor multilateral diplomacy, gradual pressure and negotiated outcomes over unilateral brinkmanship. A confrontational approach that some countries, would definitely prefer, we have seen that with China, makes coordination harder and fractures, allied messaging. Brazil, in particular, prioritizes regional stability and dialogue, while the EU is cautious about actions that undermine international legal norms. These are things that are in their DNA. But that said, Precious, allies may still cooperate tactically if there is clarity of purpose and respect for shared, processes. The real danger is not disagreement, they will always have that, but loss of trust, which weakens collective leverage. Sustainable influence in Venezuela will require consensus ultimately, not cohesion.
Mm. Well, a lot to watch out for. He has also threatened to a military intervention in Iran and Greenland as well. We're following that development. Always a pleasure to have you on. Global Affairs Analyst Collins Oweke.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.